Hi again, everybody. I am reunited with my one true love, my laptop, my light, my sun, my moon, my stars. I am so happy I have it back. Thank you again so much to everybody who contributed, who gave, what they could, anything from like $1 to crazy high amounts of money. I appreciate all of it so much. I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you truly, and as always, for being here with us on this zany journey. I don't have any more UNGIRL content for you today, but I do have just a show I am so excited about that I'm getting ready to introduce to everybody. It is called Post Tech Radio. It is about the kinds of technology on the horizon, the kind of technology we already have, the technology organizing that we're doing among laborers in tech, and just really all of the different ways technology can serve to move us towards the future and make things more equitable for everybody. If you missed it, it comes on Fridays at 3 right before my stream for UNGIRL, and definitely make a point to catch it. Go check it out. Keep an eye on it. Go subscribe, whatever you want to do. Follow them on Twitter, Post Tech Radio. It is going to be such a blast. I'm so excited to actually watch this episode with y'all because I'm going to be watching it while I restream it. And I'm just genuinely excited about that. All right. Here we go, everybody. Strap in. Inaugural voyage. Post Tech Radio. Let's go.
Hello. Hello.
have this undercurrent of like leftist thinking in the first place, and like what is it like to be in collective and community with each other. It doesn't always get executed well, but that is an undercurrent. And so like it was something in the air there that like really helped them foment this idea of a worker-owned cooperative. And you know, they're evergreen graduates as well. So like again, sort of like radical leftist galaxy brain sort of type thinking.
There's sort of this like imagine like an ambient epistemic facilitation. Like if you live in a city where this doesn't seem possible, you're not going to think of it. When it seems like it could be possible, whether or not it's more possible there than anywhere else, you're going to be thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And excuse me, I think that we had already seen, like, you know, one of my local grocery stores is a cooperative. And you just see that word and like, you know, kind of to your point, right? The exposure, like when you're exposed to things and different people showing you different possibilities, it allows for you to think about, well, what does this possibility look like in my own life? Is it a probability at that point? And so they started Story 2 Design as a way to own their own labor, and then they invited me and my coworker Jasmine to join them about 3 years in, and we've all been together there for about 5 years. Roxanne just left. We just hired on a new, Roxanne was filling the role of a project manager. And we just hired on our new project manager, Cece. And so, you know, and when we were doing we sort of spearheaded the hiring process. When I spearheaded that, I was very intentional about putting the call out for not only like Black people, disabled people, but also like there are other different identity vectors that are being oppressed. So like people over the age of 45 in tech is like unheard of, especially once you get out of a certain point. And so like we were very intentional about having people like not only inviting sort of young folks, but also our elders, or elders to me, right? Like,
yeah,
other people are probably their contemporaries, but my elders, and like learning from that as well. So inviting all those folks to the table and creating a space where all of us are participating. That's really what our cooperative is about, is like creating, I mean, and it's messy work, right? It's not like super.
I wouldn't trust it if it wasn't.
Right, yeah. But like, you know, we're in the process of building a place where we all can not only just own our labor, but pool our collective labor together to produce really wonderful experiences and we focus specifically on like social justice, social good organizations that are value aligned with us. Right?
I mean, that's the difference between like literally between like a bunch of freelancers as an agency, right? I can't just say I'm a project manager and like just sit there waiting to get hired as a project manager for like my one client that I'm working directly for, unless I'm like in the project management biz. But you get to specialize, you get to like wear different hats.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we're still kind of figuring out, I mean, we've been around for 5 years, and like for a new business, for any, like, you know, that really goes to talk about the need and also the staying power for Story 2. Like being around for 5 years as a new business is a really big feat. And so we're kind of like at this place now of like, what does the next 5 years look like? Right. To some people, it's like, haha, that's laughable. But like, if you think about where Facebook was 10 years ago, if you think about where like a lot of these tech companies that like TikTok, for instance, right, or Byte, you know, a lot can happen in 5 years. And so thinking about like how what do the next 5 years for Story 2 look like? What does the next 5 years look like as we're building out this agency that like serves the people that we want to serve, tell their stories in a way that engages people, and leverages our expertise to make the world a better place. Like that gets a little bit messy because, you know, a year ago, none of us would have even thought about a global wide like flu pandemic that traps us in our local, like traps us really in our local communities. And like we, you know, even like last year, it was impossible to think about what was happening with GameStop right now, and sort of like what is getting exposed and how it's getting exposed and how that's changing the ways that we interact with each other. So yeah, we're really in a place where we're looking at the long term of the organization and how do we invite people to be part of us in an oasis of like, so be an oasis in this like really, sometimes really horrible tech scene, and like not in a bad way, just like the hiring process for me was really interesting because the folks that were attracted to our organization really came being sort of burnt out from bigger companies, and sort of like to Zen's point earlier, like having these like horrible experiences as these like solo practitioners and really wanting to find a place where they were held and seen, really kind of taken care of a bit better, is like what we're doing right now. Story, that's like my job at Story 2, is designing an organization to take care of that.
To your, I think your success also speaks something to the market, right? Like the same way that I guess like fair trade has become trendy. I don't know what the future of like support collective agencies looks like, but clearly there are folks right now, probably, as you said, mostly other social justice oriented clients who like really want to support. Like I know here at Not Safe, we want to start offering stickers, and so like finding a shop that does union labor is like pretty important, right? Like whatever wherever your politics align with business and you have a business need, you're going to want to find people to work with. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see, and maybe you can speak more to this in a moment, of like how if your client mix has shifted. Also going back to something you said a little bit ago, like kind of the core of what you said, like this is for the benefit of the employees. It really strikes me that like every company says they're for the benefit of the employees, and every company probably to some extent may try to have their heart in the right place. But at some point in time, those are two different needs, and one of those needs is going to be more important. And
yeah, I think
moving to a worker-owned model is really the only way to like flip it to like the business needs are the worker needs. They're inseparable because they're the same.
Yeah,
because it's worker-owned.
Yeah, I mean, to your point earlier, and I want to make space for them to talk as well, but like I've been sort of noodling on this a little bit. Like your business is your politics, and your politics is your business. Like how you spend your time. Like you wake up, like in our capitalist society, you wake up, you go to work for, if you're lucky, for 8 hours a day. If you're not so lucky, even more than that. And if you're really lucky, less than that, right? But you spend a significant amount of your waking hours like doing labor in this society. And how you spend your labor is like what you do every day is your politics in action, right? And so like thinking about that in those terms, and not to be like on some radical tip, just in a like, on mindfulness tip, like when you're thinking about your practice, when you're thinking about what you practice every day, are you practicing the kind of world that you want to live in? Are you practicing the kind of world that you want, not your children, but maybe your friends' children, or like people that you care about, or even your elders to live in? Like that's the question. Like not to be like big and philosophical, but that's kind of the question that's always constantly playing out in the background of my brain. And so when you think about that, right, when you go to work, it's not like, I think a lot of people like to separate, well, I'm going to just separate like my electoral politics or my policy politics from the kind of work that I do. And like, we're living in a time right now where it's clear that is no longer an option for a growing majority of people. And so the kind of like, but I think that in the United States, we kind of frame like political action as this like one and done thing. We kind of frame it in terms of like an either or. And what I really like about being at Story 2 and like working at Story 2 is like, what if you're creating an institution that takes care of people? What if what if your radical politics is creating a space for other possibilities to emerge? And it's not necessarily like, I think there's like a lot of folks who like have like a socialist bent or a capitalist bent or whatever, what have you. But really, like I'm not trying to think about economic policy in terms of that sort of framing. I'm more thinking about like your everyday life. How do you wake up? How do you go to work? How do you show up for people that you're working with? And like how is their labor being valued in relation to your labor? And thinking about those things is really, really important, I think, for work and the future of our economy. Because like as we're seeing, like our economy is not, it's not kind of like what we like. A lot of people think these things are immutable, right? I've been really inspired. I think it's maybe because it's Aquarius season, so I've been really thinking about Ursula Le Guin and like Angela Davis, right? And like Ursula Le Guin has this, Kay Le Guin has this quote. She's also a Portlander, so like as someone who went to school in Portland, like I'm just like, you know, West Coast Aquarius people, like that's what I've been thinking about a lot. She has this quote that is like, you know, and I'm gonna mingle it, but it's like, capitalism seems inevitable, but like 1,000 years ago, the divine right of kings seemed inevitable, right? So there's always this like way in which like the systems that we think are like infallible or immovable are just movable systems. And so that's, I think being part of a worker-owned cooperative is a way of me trying to like move those systems and at least create space for possibility to exist for something else to emerge out of that, right? While also like maintaining the fact that like in a worker-owned cooperative, right? I should be clear about that. But also like maintaining the fact that like we have to survive in capitalism,
right?
And there's a different way between like joining a company that gives you benefits and just being a sole proprietorship. Like there are other ways of existing.
Or the thought of like, I'll work really hard my whole life, make a bunch of coin, and then like turn to philanthropy. Like you can be doing this on a micro. I wouldn't even say the thing you said earlier is like heady and philosophical. It's so simple. It's almost tautological. It's like the stuff you do is the stuff you do. Like, what are you doing? That's what you're doing. You can't say you're doing one thing, think you're doing one thing. Look at what you're actually doing, and what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard for Americans to do that, right? Like, I think it's hard for, like, we live in a society, like, even now, like, we can't even talk.
Are you saying we live in a society?
No. I was going to say we live in a society. Even now, like, let's talk about COVID, and, like, let's talk about, like, how we're not talking about how, like, just the amount of grief that exists in the United States and how we're just sort of, like, working through it. Like we're just working through it, and that we're not taking care of each other in the ways that we could be.
And how it feels like a massive gold mine if you find an employer who like acknowledges that your output might be 15% lower than typical, instead of like, I can't come to work today. There was a coup on the government, and I am very sad in ways I can't describe because they're not happening to me, but they're also happening extremely to me. Goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm really grateful for a space like Story 2. I feel really honored that they trust me to be the president. Like that's a huge different, that's a different role, stepping out of my role as a UX designer and really stepping into this role of like doing business development and like representing the organization and also helping shape the next however long I'm president for. We're still figuring that out. But like, that's huge. I'm really happy to be part of it.
5 more years. I will. I want to dig more into the mechanics of Story 2, but first, then your thoughts on everything.
Everything.
I'm sorry, and there's stuff going on in my house, so the workers just left, so I'm gonna, or my apartment, I should say. They just fixed the light, so I'm gonna go off camera for just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, so much of what Jordan was talking about resonates really hard around sort of, I think about the environment in which I'm doing my life's work, doing the things that I do, as the environment is continuously changing, like the exchange rate of my aliveness. So if I'm in a space where
one spoon really doesn't buy what it used to.
No, the spoon inflation. The spoon inflation during COVID has been wild, and no one's talking about the spoon inflation. Yeah, and the idea of like having a worker-owned cooperative and saying we exist for the benefit of the workers, it doesn't require a sort of gesture of good faith to believe that, because the way that you hold your identity as a collective, your meta identity, is us, instead of like us mediated through an HR department, or us mediated through what is, you know, in vogue to present about your diverse, inclusive culture to the outside realm. Like
there's abstraction reifying my labor today.
Yeah, it gets to be, you don't only invest when you are the workers and you are responding to your own needs. You don't only respond to the things that make a really good press release about like, oh, we now have this benefit, or we now allow dogs in the office. Like those sorts of things that are easy photo ops, that are really, really alluring, because it's like, oh, you mean we get to step out of some form of like feudalistic, not getting to have any sort of desires whatsoever?
It's
like,
actually
yes,
extra feudalistic. It's like,
it is.
You know, sociologists call it a total institution, right? Like the military. Like, we will take care of all your needs. You also live with us, and you're also at our disposal constantly. I think of it more as like a Dyson sphere around human labor.
Yes.
Like, let's just give you dry cleaning and childcare, and put you in an apartment that is labeled with our company.
Oh, and, you don't already have a puppy? Here's your puppy. We've issued you a puppy. It's an emotional support puppy.
It's the only dog allowed in the office. You're allowed to play with it at your desk only.
Yeah, there is that sort of sense of the authenticity of what does we mean where you're doing your labor. Does we mean like actually me as a human and all of what I am? Or is it me as a producer of like a deliverable? Is it me as like, well, what do you need to be effective in this context? Like, what is my well-being as it relates to the collective? So yeah, there's something there about like being able to exist in a spiritual alignment to your own needs as an individual, as like a being, and having that be at the forefront, and not having all of these different levels of institution between you and getting to express those needs and starting to strategize about how to meet those needs, and having like those needs being prioritized. Yeah, like not having to trust that, oh, I really hope they hire someone for the HR department who's going to allow us to have employee resource groups. Like that level of, yeah, the expectations of being held just going up that much higher to actually starting to address our actual needs is like the promise of collective. And that's part of why it's so hard, because it's so like such an absurd notion to have needs that are cared about and potentially even strategized towards, that aren't just, you know, an external deliverable that someone else can benefit from.
So we go ahead and respond to that, please.
Oh yeah, I also like, as someone who's in the trenches, I also want to just be honest about the hard, like there's a flip side to that, because I think a lot of people sort of like fall in love with this idea of being taken care of in an organization, or like this sort of like balancing needs is hard, right? And like every time you add a new person or a new variable, you add complexity. And so like one of the things that I really like, as someone who sort of like grew up in these places where we talked a lot about collectivism, and we talked a lot about having your needs met by the collective. It's like we're still approaching it from a very like individualistic mindset, right? And like there are people, like I want to be acknowledging, like there are folks whose ancestors and like direct ancestors, like Lolo and Popo, come from collectivist communist countries, right? And like that is not something that is that seems appealing, because like the needs of the many, like to be all Star Trekky about it, the needs of the many really did outweigh the needs of the few, right? And so like the like while I like sort of like on a daily practical basis, like as a small company, we get to have like these lines of communication where like the members' needs are addressed, right? But like I also want to be mindful, like as you grow larger and look at things like Mondragon or other places like which are the biggest cooperative in the world, and it's like it's huge actually. In Spain, like there becomes a little bit more tension. Like you end up seeing a lot of like democratic models replicated, where you have representatives of people like going to bargain, right? Collective bargaining. And like those need, like as we're thinking about scaling up, if you think about scaling up, like those needs also need to be addressed, right? Because your individual needs may morph when talking to a group, right? Like so your individual need may be like, I need to rest. And then you hear the need from like your other members is like, we also need to rest, but not at the same time that you need to rest, right? And so like finding that balance is like also really important. Like finding how you can support someone who has like different neurodivergent needs than you, right? Where some may line up and some may not. Like those are like, that is the beautiful, wonderful, messy struggle of being part of a collective. And it becomes even like a lot of like, I also want to acknowledge why some people may be turned off by that, right? Because it's like sometimes you just want to go to work, show up, punch a card, leave, and like not think about.
I don't want to be in a relation.
Yeah, like people, or if you are in relation, the relation that you're in is clearly defined because it's been iterated over time through capitalism, that it feels comfortable, safe, and familiar, right? And so like when people show up to a company and they're like, that's the boss says this, and like we all do what the boss says. And when you show up to a place where it's like, we're all the bosses, because we're all worker owners, and we get to direct policy and procedure and like iterate on that together, and we're asking you to create with us. Like I have seen people just be like, no, absolutely not. Like I really want that kind of freedom, and like I do not have the bandwidth to deal with that as I'm dealing with COVID, and also as I'm dealing with like, I'm watching Black people get murdered every day on the internet. Like I just want to show up in a place where I don't have to think about this. Mm-hmm. Like that is also a real thing. And so like you have to balance, for me, like as a dreamer, I want to create a world, like I want to get to a Star Trek future. And so I'm working toward a Star Trek future. But some people just want to show up, whether it's the Federation or the Rebels or like, whoever it is, like the Federation, the Maquis, or like the Cardassians, they don't care, because like at the end of the day, everyone needs a janitor, and you can just be a janitor and like move on, So
to your point earlier about creating new reality is like, like we're all built differently. Like I'm the kind of person who I could emotionally process for a good chunk of the day, but I show up to one of those like supposedly hammered out structures in a workplace, and I'm the neurodivergent weirdo who's like, well, why not? Oh, that's against the script. I didn't know there was and so I would much rather try to reach consensus with a group of people than have to accept, participate in structures that I barely understand, much less agree with. Before we get too further into this, I like this split. No, this is perfect. Just saying, before we get into the split between like the promise, the starry-eyed promise, and then what it looks like on the other side, I'm going to give us a quick little break here. Come back and, I'm just going to pop up a video, and then we'll start talking about the mechanics of Story 2 and what we can learn from your success and tribulation. So be right back. All right, narrowly hit my shove as many potato chips into my mouth as I can in 60 seconds goal. Looks like Zen is away for a moment, but I wanted to. So you were speaking earlier about, if I could paraphrase, you can tell me how far off I am. Basically saying, yes, the ability for. I'm gonna mute Zen for a moment. I think that's where it's. Yep. Basically saying the like starry-eyed hope of assuming that being in a collective automatically means your needs as workers and as people are taken care of, and there's never going to be any tension between your business needs and your people needs. Perhaps more true from a starting foundation than a, like, let's just say Fortune 500 company, but that doesn't mean that you are devoid of tension between the humans and the labor that's being produced. You have more direct control over it, perhaps, and you can certainly have more influence in negotiating how that proceeds, but there are still tensions to resolve, and at points, you still might have a conflict between what you as a worker want and need, what you as a human want and need, and then what you as a collective want and need, and how that triangulates with what the business wants and needs, which is this extra relationship that everyone is also in addition to in relation with each other. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think, earlier when I was talking about, we have a motto at Story 2 that the cooperative exists for the benefit of its members. Like, that is our essential value and essential tenet of like what we talk about. And so when we talk about business needs, we always keep that in mind when it comes to conflict. But we're also a small, like, I think people are like, oh, start a cooperative and things will be okay. And it's like, we're also a small business. So like all of the crap that comes with running a small business, like down to like difficulty with documentation exists, right? And so like, we're going through this point now where we just onboarded someone who has an incredible amount of experience. And it's like, why don't you all have an employee manual? And I'm just like,
good point. Yeah.
Good point. Good question. Because we had been just scrapping for 5 years just to get to a point where we could even bring on an employee, right? And so what does it mean, like, when you, in some cooperatives, like, and it really depends on the kind of cooperative, you don't get offered membership until you've been there for 6 months to a year. So what does that mean? Like, what we're now defining, like, what does it mean to be an employee? What does it mean to be a member? What are the benefits of membership? What are the benefits of being an employee? We're also sort of like, we believe in cooperation and autonomy. So that sets us up to be somewhat similar to an agency model. So if we have someone come in who wants to be a sort of a free agent, like, how do you relate to our business as a free agent versus like as an employee versus a member? Like, I'm in the process of delineating those things right now, right? And documenting all those things right now. So someone who comes after me, or like someone who wants to step into that role while I'm still here, has a way of wayfinding through that. But also so that once you document it and it's clear and it's a place that people can reference, that, like, I'm also a dungeon master, right? And I have a bunch of different notes of like my world as I'm building out the world.
You're an experience designer through and through. As in talking about this, like, everything is experience design. If you think about it as an experience designer, yeah.
Right, but I have this rule, right, that like nothing in the world in D&D is set in stone until I tell it to a player. right? And so like a player, because it also allows for like a player to be like, okay, well, this is how my character responds to it, and I'm super like, that's weird, and like I'll change, or like not what I expected, and I'll change my notes, right? And so it's kind of that way with any kind of documentation, right? Surprisingly, like Dungeons and Dragons, yeah, it's kind of like it's that way with documentation too, right? You write this thing down, somebody's going to go and reference that document, and then come back and pull that back to you and say like, this is what you wrote down. And then you have to look at it and be like, oh, did I actually say that like 3 years ago in this context?
I was not expecting this auto confrontation study.
Yeah, right. So like, you know, you need to, and we're doing radical, like the other thing about it is we're doing radical crap, like we're doing radical shit. And so like, we need to document those processes. So in case somebody wants to iterate on those, right? Because people are iterating on capitalism all the time and processes that happen within capitalism all the time, especially extractive capitalism.
Then I think you have this meta, like, sorry, just thinking like you have this meta of like, how do you share that out the same way capitalists share these ideas? How do you share to other collectives? That's another reason why I'm glad you're here is like people listening, people I know, Zen, you are putting together Apapacho, which is your own like worker-owned thing. There's like, I want to hopefully for here for a few minutes, like also be thinking about what the people who might be sitting here hoping to get on that like equivalent of the like cottagecore dream of like, what if we all just bought houses and like lived in a house and like lived out in the woods? Like everyone wants to have a worker-owned co-op, but like feet hit the ground.
Documentation is super important. Like if I could tell you anything, documentation is super important. Revisiting that documentation and like aligning yourself with that on a regular basis, whether that's like quarterly or yearly, and like revisiting the things that you wrote down and iterating on that is super important. Way more than telling your story. Listening, and then also like always thinking about, excuse me, what is the experience of people joining who haven't been in the work for 5 years or 3 years or 2 years? Like someone showed up to your organization tomorrow and was like, yeah, like someone showed up to your organization tomorrow and was like, I'm joining and I'll do whatever it takes. Because like, as you build, if you build it, they will come, right? And so like making sure that those things are there so you can guide people through it is really helpful. And so that you have some way, like if you're a person from a traumatized background, your working memory may be a little bit weird. And so like having a place where you like, you know, having a place where you can revisit and be like, oh, right, I was smart. And this one time.
I wrote it down. I have shared so many Notion templates of like dashboards that are just aligning on goals, aligning on what the structure of a deliverable is. And when I shared that out to some folks who are starting to put together like a freelancer cooperative, they do not dare call themselves an agency or a studio yet, and found out about a productized solution called Wethos, which basically what they... Huh?
Tell me more, because I want to hear.
So, okay, is there a chat I can boop?
Oh, I looked at Wethos a long time ago.
But they released their first few features just probably this year, because I know I was sitting in pandemic times. And so much of what they do is just like show you what a contract might look like you contract Legos for small creative agencies. And that does so much to just give you a sense of what is possible and what the industry standard is, so that you know what the rules are, so you can remix on that. I love that that as an actionable thing when you're learning what came up in your own cooperative, essentially in your like relationships with the people that you're building with. The things that come up, they might come up for other people. They might not. But getting to remix on what other people have already put into practice saves you so much time. And yeah, it helps get closer to what it is that your values are, and seeing the difference between what other people value. These are all the things that they put in their contracts. This is the stuff that we feel like we need in addition to that. Yeah.
Or subtracting from, you know.
Yes.
Like, the goal of contracts is like, in all documentation, it's twofold, right? It's like, one, to tell people where you're coming from, right? And to like express your ethos in a way that's very clear. And two is to protect yourself, right? Like, that is the point of a contract. It is a formalized boundary. And that is the role of like all of your documentation. It's a formalized boundary that people have agreed upon, right? And just because of that boundary is formalized doesn't mean there isn't room for negotiation, right? But I think, you know, when you think about like sort of the structure of like the tyranny of structurelessness, and like when you start thinking about when people are like, oh, let's just like go with vibes, man, like, you know, those sort of things, like,
as long as you document the vibes.
Yeah, document the vibe, or like just know that vibes change, but documents do not, right? And like, unless we all agree to change those. And so it's like having a formalized structure, because I think like, you know, I think the starry-eyed promise is like, I think a lot of folks who come from, like, for me personally, like I was really attracted to work at cooperatives because I had been burnt by so many other forms of work, especially working in the like nonprofit industrial complex, and also working in like civic organizations, right? And civic was a lot better because there were unions and things like that. But you know, I just got tired of certain things. And then I show up at this sort of like scrappy startup and start influencing culture and things like that. But like, you know, as I did my own work, I realized that a lot of things that I was doing was in reaction to things that were no longer present in my environment. And like,
oh crap, this is a trauma response.
Right, right. Has my whole career been a trauma response? Right? And like
companies don't hire people, they hire traumas.
Yeah. No,
where are you deriving your self-worth from? Is it external? Great. I can explain that.
Oh, no. Totally, yeah. So I think it's really important, like, as you're building, you're not building a traumatic place. You're building a place that like is going to take care of you. So like, what do you need to be taken care of? Like, and how do you document that? And so when your traumas show up, like, and work trauma is a real thing. Like, we're dealing with it at our company. We're trying to engage and move forward with it and address it collectively. But like, as you deal with that, like, how do you put systems in place so that you remember how to practice care, right? Because you can practice your traumatic behaviors as well as like you can practice your behaviors that you find traumatic, and you can find behaviors that you can practice behaviors you find caring. And so like, that's what documentation is. It's like helping you document the behaviors you find caring and helping other people institute those things along the way.
I just put up a ticker that said accounting accommodating for trauma as a business need. In our last few minutes here, I want to admit a naivete. When I asked you for your title and you said president of this org, my first response was like, oh, like it's a worker-owned co-op. I kind of assumed it'd be like workers 1 through 5, and you'd all show up like linking arms, and like that would just be each of you like say 1/5 of a sentence. Not really, but like I guess the question I'm asking is structure, right? Like going into a structure like this, it's a worker-owned co-op. It doesn't mean that people don't have different administrative duties, but I think that some people who might be thinking of forming a co-op might not be thinking about the need of, like, we're not just all individual contributors and also managers and also directors. Division of labor. Do you find that your division of labor model is like, I'm not going to say objectively best, but like, how does that work for you? What advantages do you think you might have or disadvantages compared to like everyone having the exact same share of the responsibility pie?
Oh my gosh, Jordan, I love your expression right now.
Well, it's just like, you know, we weren't clear on it for a while, and we're starting to get clear on it now, right? And so, like, I was just elected president, and when I was elected, it was a ceremonial title. And then when we brought someone else on, like, again, when you add a member, you add complexity. And so when we brought on this new person, she was like, "You're the president. I need for you to know these things." And like that changed the game, right? Like we like in a lot of ways, Cece with her experience is getting us together. And so like, but like if I need to know these things, like that changes the dynamic of the district, like what our labor is doing, and like we're figuring that stuff out. And I think like I really started looking at other worker-owned cooperatives because you do need someone that's helping you hold the vision, but also like is the interface. So like when opportunities like this come up that are strategic for us, like that is my job to go do that thing, right? And that is a form of labor that I like. It's a job, right? Like it's work, right? And that work needs to be recognized in the same way that like a lot of times women in femmes work gets invisibilized and it gets put in the role of like project manager instead of like IC, right? Or in a lot of ways in which like operate like an operations coordinator or your equity person is a Black woman or like a woman of color, but like not necessarily leading the charge of the organization. Like those, like when you start looking and parsing out labor, you want to be able to define those roles as clearly as possible, and have people opt into it. And we're doing that right now because I think when people hear no bosses, they're like, oh yay, like, but like at a certain point, like you do need someone to be a decision maker, and they do need to be empowered organizationally to be that kind of decision maker. And the kind of decisions that they're making need to be clear, right? Like, so is this person making a decision about the product going out the door, or is this person making a decision about the strategic vision? Is that person the same person? If so, how can you recognize that kind of labor that they're doing and how exhausting that is? Like all of those things are around boundaries and making sure that people don't burn out. And if you don't have
go ahead.
And if you don't have clarity around that, you will burn out. Like you will, like, because you'll like, I don't know, like so many people who are from traumatic backgrounds are used to carrying the weight of everything, right? And like doing like especially if you come from nonprofits or like you're constantly trying to prove your worth, like people in minority and marginalized positions are used to doing, you take on everything. And so like having a boundary to hold yourself accountable by saying like, look, this is your role. This is your position.
And it's better to design an org structure that allows people to swap in and out of leadership roles rather than asking everyone to be 1/5 president, 4/5 IC at any given time. I'm drawing a comparison in my head. I'll out myself as polyamorous. No big. I do it all the time. Of like descriptive versus prescriptive hierarchy, right? Like being egalitarian in your non-monogamy does not mean not having nesting partners, not having anyone that you spend more time with than others. It doesn't mean parsing everything out equally. It means being really clear around like, this is what our relationship means to me, to us, and how we communicate it to the world. If we're living together or what have you, doesn't mean you automatically get a say in my relationships, even though I still am entangled with you in a way that looks hierarchical in some way. It's not prescriptive. Like you're not in a particular position of power. You're being, Jordan as president, you're being empowered to do certain things and not do certain other things. And there's still structures to challenge that and work with that. You don't get to just decide to become a despot, become a boss at any given time.
Yeah, because I'm not anybody's boss, but I am like helping direct the organization and like doing things a servant leader would do. And I want to be clear about that. And I need other people to see what that is and help hold me accountable.
Yeah, I like the way that that's articulated, like it's functional power versus symbolic power. So people are still accountable to you to like raise issues because it is like, this is a function, and everyone's input is an important part of that function being carried out, rather than I have this authority, this like symbolic power, which lessens other people's voices.
Yeah, I think, you know, as we think about, I mean, I know we're running short on time, but I think one of the really important takeaways to think about is like, how do I put this? Like, we're going to have to figure out what power looks like differently, and we're going to have to do that in a way, but like some of us are going to have to do that in a way where we haven't been exposed to different power models, and all we know is like what we don't want and not what we want, and that is the hard work, right? It's like, how do you do something that is based on an indigenous model if you never worked with indigenous people? But like, you know that is an alternative to this extractive capitalistic model, right? And it's like you're gonna have to skill up in those things, and just know that like in the background you always, like, because you've been exposed to this model over and over and over and over again, you're going to fall back and default to models that are oppressive. Like everybody's going to do that, and not like in a like we live in a society that values and incentivizes that model and those roles. And so what you need to do, like as a leader, like this is what I do, is like I like have a therapist, a mindful eating coach, like some like I actively ask people to hold me accountable. Like I am working constantly to be in relations with people and transform the nature of that power dynamic, because that power dynamic, if you don't actively walk the other way on the moving sidewalk, you'll move toward that power dynamic of like being a totalitarian boss. So you must actively be walking against it.
This is the worst travelator ever.
I think we gotta wrap up here. This is friggin' fascinating. I might want to have both of you on to continue this discussion, maybe with other co-op agencies as we continue. Want to talk to you about the one in Spain that you mentioned. Real quick, I want to give a shout out to our network. We're at Not Safe for Wonks, youtube.com/notsafemedia, NSFW Wonks on Twitter, and patreon.com/notsafe. There's a media network that has made this possible. They're a rad group of leftist content creators, and you can get involved and support them in all of these ways. And then here in our world, we have Jordan, Twitter at Jordannaut, web story2designs.com, and throw Jordan some cash, kofi.com/Jordannaut, JORDONAUT. And then on Zen side, we have zenlara.com, cutiejack.com, the Queer Transformative Justice Atlanta Collective, Twitter at Tobamese, TOBAMESE, and Cash App, Zenlara, ZENLARA. Quick, like 15-second plugs for your things that you want to draw more attention to. Jordan, I know you mentioned something.
Oh, well, yeah. Natasha Marin, who was our anti-racist facilitator and responsible for us moving to our next level, seriously, she is doing something called Sites of Power. Follow her work, Natasha, NATASHA, Marin, MARIN. She does story-based strategies for dismantling racism. She's responsible for reparations.me. She's doing incredible work around Black joy. And I just want to uplift her work every chance that I get.
Awesome. Thank you. Zen, how about you?
Nothing comes. No. Well, Queer Tech is going to be having our new members meeting. Queer.tech. Yeah. Which right now I think the site is down, so visit it later. But we'll be having our new members meeting in February, and yeah, we talk about this sort of thing. And
cool.
Yeah.
Well, if you're already here on YouTube watching this, or if you're on any platform that is not like my personal page, but is attached to the Not Safe Media page, right now we have going live UNGIRL, which is part of the weekly Not Safe for Walk stream with Rachel Kahn and guests. go ahead and refresh the page after this ends and check it out. Hop on over there. Thank you both so much for coming on and chatting. This has been really nourishing and exciting. And I need to lovingly extract more information from both of you over the future about how to build a much better work-life world. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.